Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped off the shuttle and took her first breath of Voranthe air. It smelled like copper and something sweet, like flowers that had been left in water too long. She had prepared for this moment for 3 years, learning the language, the customs, and the complicated web of politics that governed the Voranthe collective. But nothing in her training had prepared her for what she saw. The spaceport was massive, bigger than anything on Earth. Towers of dark metal rose into a purple sky, and thousands of Voranthe moved through the crowds below. They were tall beings, almost 8 feet high, with skin that shifted between shades of blue and gray depending on their mood. Their forearms moved constantly as they talked, making gestures that Sarah had studied but still found hard to read. What caught her attention was not the architecture or the aliens themselves. It was the contrast. On one side of the spaceport, she saw gleaming vehicles and well-dressed officials. On the other side, behind a fence of glowing energy, she saw crowds of Voranthe in ragged clothes. They watched the arrivals with eyes that held no hope. Marcus Webb, her security chief, walked beside her. He was a large man with careful eyes who had served in 3 different conflict zones before joining the diplomatic corps. He noticed the same thing she did. "Quite a difference between the 2 sides," he said quietly. Sarah nodded but said nothing. She had read reports about inequality in the Voranthe collective, but seeing it was different from reading about it. The official documents from the Voranthe government talked about prosperity and progress. They did not mention the thin faces behind that fence. A group of Voranthe officials approached them. The leader was dressed in robes of deep red, which Sarah knew meant he held high rank. His skin was a calm gray, showing no emotion. "Ambassador Chen," he said, his voice making the strange clicking sounds that were part of the Voranthe language. "I am First Administrator Keth Vorak. Welcome to our world. We are honored by humanity's interest in formal relations." Sarah bowed in the Voranthe way, bending at the waist while spreading her hands. "The honor is ours, First Administrator. Earth hopes this will be the beginning of a long friendship between our peoples." Keth Vorak's skin flickered with a brief shade of blue, which might have been pleasure or might have been something else entirely. Sarah made a mental note to pay attention to such details. The official party led them to a transport vehicle that floated above the ground. As they traveled through the city, Sarah watched through the windows. The contrast she had seen at the spaceport continued everywhere. Beautiful buildings stood next to crumbling structures. Clean streets crossed paths with dirty alleys where Voranthe seemed to live in poverty. "Your city is impressive," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral. "The capital represents the best of our civilization," Keth Vorak replied. "We have worked hard to build a society where all citizens can thrive." Sarah noticed that Marcus shifted slightly in his seat. She could tell he wanted to say something about the obvious contradiction between those words and what they were seeing outside. But he remained silent, as a good security officer should. They arrived at the human embassy, a building that had been prepared for them in the diplomatic quarter. It was comfortable but not large, which Sarah took as a sign of how the Voranthe viewed humanity's importance. Earth was a newcomer to galactic politics, having only developed faster-than-light travel 20 years ago. The Voranthe had been among the stars for over 1,000 years. Once they were inside and alone, Marcus spoke freely. "Did you see those people behind the fence? And the ones in the alleys? This doesn't match any of the reports we received." Sarah sat down and rubbed her tired eyes. The journey from Earth had taken 3 weeks, and she had not slept well. The reports came from official Voranthe sources. We had no way to verify them independently until now. "What do we do?" Marcus asked. "Our mission is to establish diplomatic relations and negotiate trade agreements," Sarah said. "But I think we need to understand what's really happening here first." Over the following weeks, Sarah attended many official functions. She met with ministers and administrators. She smiled and made polite conversation. She signed preliminary agreements about cultural exchange and scientific cooperation, and all the while she watched and listened and learned. The official story of the Voranthi Collective was simple. It was a democratic government where elected officials served the people. Resources were shared fairly, and all citizens had equal opportunities. Poverty had been eliminated long ago through wise policies and advanced technology. The reality was different. Sarah began to notice things that did not fit the official story. At a dinner party, she overheard two officials laughing about how easy it was to manipulate votes in the outer provinces. During a tour of a factory, she saw workers who looked exhausted and afraid. When she asked about labor conditions, she was told that all workers volunteered for their jobs and were well compensated. She started keeping a private journal, writing down everything she observed. She knew she had to be careful. Her communications were probably monitored, and she could not trust anyone outside her small team. One night, about a month after their arrival, there was a knock at her private quarters. Marcus was at her door, and with him was a young Voranthi woman. Her skin was a pale blue that Sarah had learned meant fear or distress. "Ambassador, this is Nalith," Marcus said. "She works as a cleaner in the diplomatic quarter. She has something to tell you." Nalith's 4 arms were trembling. "Ambassador Chen, I should not be here. If they find out I spoke to you, they will take me to the correction facilities. But I have heard that humans are different, that you believe in something called justice." Sarah invited them inside and closed the door. "Please sit down, you're safe here. Tell me what's troubling you." Nalith sat on the edge of a chair, her body tense and ready to run. "Everything you have been told is a lie. The elections are fake. The prosperity is fake. Everything is controlled by the High Council, and they take everything for themselves while the rest of us starve." Sarah felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her expression calm. "These are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" Nalith reached into her worn clothing and pulled out a small data crystal. "My brother worked in the Central Archives before he disappeared. He copied files that show everything. Tax records showing where the money really goes. Lists of people who were taken for speaking out. Recordings of council members dividing stolen resources among themselves." Sarah took the crystal carefully. "Why bring this to me? Why not your own authorities?" Nalith made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. "Our authorities are the ones doing this. There is no one on Vorath who can help us, but the humans are new. You are not yet part of their corruption. And I have heard that on Earth you have something we do not have here. You have a free press that can speak truth. You have courts that can hold powerful people responsible." Sarah looked at the data crystal in her hand. It was small enough to fit in her palm, but it might contain enough information to change everything. She thought about her mission, about the trade agreements and diplomatic relations. She thought about the careful reports she was supposed to send home, reports that would shape how Earth viewed the Voranthi for generations. Then she thought about the thin faces behind the fence at the spaceport. "Nalith," she said, "tell me everything." They talked through the night. Nalith explained how the High Council had controlled Vorath for centuries, maintaining their power through propaganda, surveillance, and fear. The democratic institutions were just for show. Real decisions were made in secret by a small group of families who had held power for as long as anyone could remember. The common people worked in factories and farms and mines. They were told they were free citizens, but in truth they had no choices. They could not change jobs without permission. They could not move to different cities. They could not speak against the government. Those who tried disappeared into the correction facilities, which were really prison camps where people were worked to death. "Why doesn't anyone fight back?" Marcus asked. Nalith's skin went even paler. "Many have tried. They are all gone now, and the council controls all the weapons, all the communications, everything. How can people fight when they cannot even talk to each other?" By the time morning came, Sarah had made her decision. She knew it might end her career. She knew it might cause a diplomatic incident that would harm Earth's position in galactic politics, but she also knew she could not ignore what she had learned. She was going to expose the truth about the Voranthi collective. The data crystal contained more than Sarah had expected. Her team spent days going through the files, cross-referencing names and dates, building a picture of corruption that went deeper than anything she had imagined. The evidence was undeniable. Financial records showed trillions of standard credits flowing from public accounts into private holdings controlled by council members and their families. Medical supplies meant for common citizens were redirected to luxury clinics that served only the elite. Food production reports were falsified to hide the fact that outer provinces were experiencing famines. Most disturbing were the records from the correction facilities. They were not rehabilitation centers, as the government claimed. They were death camps. Hundreds of thousands of Voranthi had been sent there over the past decade. The survival rate was less than 10%. Sarah sat in her office, staring at the evidence spread across her desk. Marcus stood nearby, his face grim. "This is genocide," he said. "They're killing their own people." "Not officially," Sarah replied. "According to these records, no one dies in the correction facilities. They all disappear from the records before that happens. The government has built a system where people simply cease to exist." "What do? If we release this through normal diplomatic channels, the council will just deny everything. They'll claim the evidence is fabricated. They'll cut off relations with Earth and probably make Nalith and her family disappear too." Sarah had been thinking about this problem for days. The normal rules of diplomacy would not work here. If she sent a formal complaint to the Voranthi government, they would bury it. If she released the information to Earth's government, it would take months for anyone to act, and by then the council would have time to destroy evidence and silence witnesses. She needed a different approach. "There's a galactic news network that broadcasts to hundreds of worlds," she said slowly. "The collective has tried to restrict access on Vorath, but they can't block it completely. If we could get this information to them." Marcus shook his head. "That would be a violation of every diplomatic protocol. Earth's government would recall you immediately. You'd probably face charges for endangering interstellar relations." "I know." Sarah picked up one of the documents, a list of names of people who had been sent to the correction facilities. Children were on that list, entire families. But if I do nothing, what does that say about Earth? What does it say about humanity? We claim to believe in freedom and justice. Are those just words, or do we actually mean them? Before Marcus could answer, there was an alert from the embassy's communication system. Sarah checked it and felt her stomach drop. "We've been summoned to meet with the High Council," she said. "All of us, immediately." The council chamber was designed to intimidate. It was a vast circular room with ceilings that disappeared into darkness. The council members sat on elevated platforms, looking down at visitors like judges examining criminals. There were 12 of them, all dressed in the deep red robes of highest authority. Keth Varek was there too, but he stood to the side, clearly subordinate to the council. The center council member spoke. He was older than the others, his skin weathered to a permanent gray. "Ambassador Chen, we have received reports that concern us." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "What kind of reports, council member?" "Reports that you have been meeting secretly with citizens of the collective, that you have been asking questions about matters that do not concern Earth's diplomatic mission here. It is normal for diplomats to interact with local citizens," Sarah said carefully. "Building understanding between peoples is part of my role." "Understanding is valuable," the council member agreed. His voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. "But we have also received reports that a citizen named Nalith has been visiting your embassy. Nalith has family members who were convicted of crimes against the collective. We must wonder what business she has with the human ambassador." Sarah felt cold fear spread through her chest. They knew. Somehow they knew. Nalith is a cleaning worker, she said. She has been helping maintain our embassy building. I have spoken with her about her work, nothing more. The council member's skin flickered with a shade of dark blue that Sarah did not recognize. Ambassador Chen, we value our relationship with Earth. We hope that relationship will continue to grow. But it can only grow if it is built on trust and respect for our internal affairs. The threat was clear. Sarah looked up at the 12 figures on their high platforms, surrounded by guards and wealth and power. They had controlled this planet for centuries. They had killed millions and gotten away with it because no one could challenge them. But they did not know about the data crystal. They did not know what evidence she had already gathered. They suspected her, but they did not have proof. I understand completely, Sarah said, bowing in the formal way. Earth has no desire to interfere in Voranthe internal affairs. Our only goal is peaceful cooperation. After the meeting, Marcus was furious. We need to get off this planet. Now, if they're already suspicious, it's only a matter of time before they search the embassy. We can't leave, Sarah said. Not yet. We need to find a way to get the evidence out first. If we run now, all of this will have been for nothing. And if we stay, we might end up in one of those correction facilities. Sarah thought about that. She thought about Earth and her family and the career she had worked so hard to build. Then she thought about Nalith, who had risked everything to bring her the truth. She thought about all the names on those lists, all the people who had disappeared simply because they wanted freedom. There's another way, she said finally. The Galactic Diplomatic Summit is in 3 weeks. Representatives from 30 different civilizations will be there, including independent media. If I can present the evidence there in front of everyone, the council won't be able to bury it. Marcus stared at her. That would be the biggest diplomatic scandal in human history. Yes, it would. Your career will be over. Sarah almost smiled. Probably, but some things are more important than careers. They began planning. The summit would be held on a neutral world called the Raxus, a small planet that served as a meeting ground for galactic diplomacy. Sarah had already been invited to attend as Earth's representative. The challenge was getting the evidence there safely. The council was watching them now. Every communication was monitored. Every visitor was noted. Sarah could not send the data through any official channels. We need a courier, she told Marcus. Someone who can carry the data physically without going through any checkpoint where it might be detected. There's a human cargo ship scheduled to depart in 5 days, Marcus said. The crew are civilians, not connected to our diplomatic mission, if we could get the data to them somehow. But before they could develop the plan further, another crisis emerged. Nalith appeared at the embassy late one night. She was injured, her skin showing the dark purple color of pain and fear. Someone had beaten her badly. They came for my family, she gasped. Security forces. They took my parents, my brothers, everyone. They said it was because of me, because I had contact with the humans. Sarah helped her inside, calling for their medical staff. You're safe here. We'll protect you. You don't understand. They know everything. One of the security agents told me as they beat me. He said you would be next. He said no human would leave Vorath alive if you tried to expose them. The weight of those words settled over the room. Sarah looked at Marcus and saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. They had underestimated the council. While she had been planning carefully, they had been planning too. We can't wait for the summit, Sarah said. We need to act now. In her years of diplomatic service, Sarah had learned that sometimes the only way to win was to do the unexpected. The council was prepared for caution. They expected her to protect herself, to follow protocols, to prioritize Earth's official interests over everything else. They did not expect her to fight. She spent the next 2 days preparing. She compiled all the evidence into a single presentation that could not be denied. She wrote a statement explaining everything she had discovered and everything she had decided to do. Then she sent encrypted messages to every contact she had made in her diplomatic career, asking for one thing: their attention. When she was ready, she requested an emergency meeting with the full High Council. They agreed, probably expecting her to apologize and promise to stay out of Voranthe internal affairs. When she arrived at the council chamber, she saw that they had increased security. Guards with weapons stood along every wall. Keth Vorak was there too, his skin a careful neutral gray. The center council member smiled at her, the expression strange on his alien face. "Ambassador Chen, we are pleased you have come to see reason." "I have come to present evidence," Sarah said. Her voice was calm and steady. She had practiced this moment many times in her mind. Evidence of crimes against the Voranthe people by this council and its predecessors. The smile vanished. The council member's skin shifted to a color she had never seen before, something between red and black. "You would not dare." "I already have." Sarah activated a small device she had been carrying. "This is a broadcast transmitter. It is currently connected to 27 independent news networks across the galaxy, as well as the diplomatic communication systems of 31 different civilizations. Everything in this room is being recorded and transmitted in real time." The guards moved toward her, but she held up her hand. "If anything happens to me or any member of my team, the full evidence package will be automatically released to every government and media organization we have contacted. That includes complete records of your financial crimes, your political manipulation, and your murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent people." Chaos erupted. Council members shouted at each other and at the guards. Keth Vorak was speaking rapidly into a communication device. Through it all, Sarah stood still, her hands steady. "You will be arrested," the center council member hissed. "Your government will abandon you. You will spend the rest of your short life in a correction facility." "Perhaps," Sarah said, "but I won't be alone. Your own people have been watching this broadcast too. The technology you use to control them also allows them to receive outside communications. By now, millions of Voranthe know the truth about what you have done." She saw it in their faces, the moment they understood. For centuries, they had maintained control through secrecy and fear. The people had been divided, isolated, unable to share information or organize resistance. But Sarah had just given them something the council could not take away. She had given them the truth. The first reports of unrest came within hours. Citizens in the outer provinces began gathering in public spaces, demanding answers about the correction facilities. Workers in the capital's factories stopped working and walked out. The security forces, many of whom had relatives who had disappeared into the council's prisons, hesitated to act against their own people. Within days, the Voranthe collective was transformed. Protests spread to every city. Members of the council tried to flee and were arrested by their own guards. The carefully constructed system of control collapsed because it had been built on lies, and lies cannot survive the light. Sarah and her team were confined to the embassy during the chaos, but they were not alone. People came from all over the capital to stand outside their building, holding signs of gratitude in the Voranthe language. They chanted her name and the word for hope. 3 weeks later, the situation had stabilized enough for diplomatic communications to resume. Sarah received a message from Earth's government, as she had expected. She was ordered to return home immediately to face questions about her actions. Several members of Congress were calling for charges against her. But she also received other messages. Thank you letters from families who had been reunited with loved ones released from the correction facilities. Requests for advice from a newly formed provisional government trying to build real democracy for the first time. An invitation from the Galactic Council to present her findings formally as a case study in ethical diplomatic intervention. On her last day on Vorath, she met with Nalith and the survivors of her family. They had been released from detention when the old government fell. They were still recovering from what they had endured, but their skin showed the soft blue color of hope. "Why did you do it?" Nalith asked. "You risked everything. Your career, your freedom, maybe your life, for people you had never met on a world you had only visited for a few months." Sarah thought about how to answer. She thought about all the documents she had studied before coming to Vorath, all the careful diplomatic language about non-interference and respect for internal affairs. She thought about the thin faces behind the fence at the spaceport. "On Earth, we have a saying," she finally said. "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. My people have not always lived up to that principle. We have our own history of looking away from suffering when it was convenient. But that history also taught us that silence is a choice, and it's a choice that has consequences." Nalith was quiet for a moment. "What will happen to you when you return to Earth?" "I don't know. Some people think I'm a hero. Others think I'm a criminal who violated diplomatic norms and endangered humanity's position in the galaxy." Sarah smiled slightly. "I think both might be right." "And you're at peace with that?" Sarah looked out the window at the city. Already, changes were visible. The energy fences that had separated rich from poor were coming down. Buildings that had fallen into ruin were being repaired. In the distance, she could hear music playing, something that had been forbidden under the old regime. "Yes," she said, "I'm at peace with that." When Sarah's shuttle departed from Vorath, a crowd of thousands gathered to watch. They did not cheer or wave flags. Instead, they stood in silence, their skin shifting through every color of gratitude and respect that the Voranthi could express. It was a display that their species had not made for an outsider in recorded history. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Sarah spent most of it preparing for what awaited her. She knew there would be hearings and investigations. She knew her career in the diplomatic service was over, but she also knew she had done the right thing. She was met at Earth's main spaceport by a crowd far larger than anything she had expected. People held signs and cheered when her shuttle landed. There were protesters, too, people who thought she had endangered Earth's interests, but they were vastly outnumbered. In the weeks that followed, Sarah testified before Congress, before the United Nations, before international tribunals. She explained everything she had seen and done, hiding nothing. She accepted responsibility for violating protocols and traditional diplomatic norms. The debates went on for months. Some argued she should be celebrated as a hero who had exposed terrible crimes and freed millions of people. Others argued she had set a dangerous precedent, that no government would trust human diplomats if they might expose internal secrets whenever they disagreed with local policies. In the end, a compromise was reached. Sarah was officially removed from the diplomatic corps for her unauthorized actions, but she was also given a commendation for her service to humanitarian values. Earth's government adopted new guidelines requiring diplomats to report evidence of mass atrocities through special channels that could not be buried or ignored. The effects on Vorath were more profound. The provisional government worked to build new institutions based on principles they had only heard about from other civilizations: free elections, independent courts, freedom of speech and assembly. It was not easy. Centuries of oppression had left deep wounds that would take generations to heal. But for the first time in living memory, the Voranthi people had hope. 2 years after Sarah's return to Earth, she received a message from the new Voranthi ambassador to Earth. It was an invitation to visit Vorath again, this time as an honored guest of the free government. They wanted to dedicate a memorial to the victims of the old regime, and they wanted her to be there. Sarah accepted. When she returned to the capital city, she barely recognized it. The gleaming towers of the elite still stood, but now they housed schools and hospitals that served everyone. The fences were gone, and people moved freely through streets that had once been divided by wealth and fear. The purple sky still smelled like copper and old flowers, but somehow it seemed brighter now. The memorial was built in the central square, where the old council had once displayed the symbols of their power. It was a wall of names, millions of them, representing everyone who had died in the correction facilities or disappeared for speaking out. At its base was a simple inscription in the Voranthi language, "Never again." Nalith was there, now serving as a minister in the new government. Her skin was a healthy blue, and she moved with a confidence that had been impossible under the old regime. With her was her family, the survivors who had been rescued when the council fell. "You changed everything," Nalith said to Sarah. "One human with nothing but the truth and the courage to speak it. You changed everything." Sarah shook her head. "I only opened a door, your people walked through it. The courage was always yours." The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of civilizations attended. When Sarah was asked to speak, she kept her words simple. The Voranthi people were not waiting to be saved by outsiders. They were waiting for truth, for an end to the lies that kept them divided and afraid. All I did was provide that truth. What they did with it, the revolution they built, the freedom they claimed, that was entirely their own achievement. She paused, looking at the crowd of thousands who had gathered to honor the dead and celebrate the living. On Earth, we sometimes debate whether other civilizations' internal affairs should concern us. We talk about sovereignty and non-interference and respecting different cultures. These are important principles, but I have come to believe that there are some things that transcend those principles. When a government is murdering its own people, silence is not neutrality. Silence is complicity. Humanity entered the galactic community as newcomers, uncertain of our place and eager to make a good impression. We were told to be careful, to respect established powers, to not cause trouble. But some things matter more than making a good impression. Justice matters. Truth matters. The lives of people who cannot defend themselves matter. I hope my actions have helped establish a different reputation for humanity. Not as troublemakers or idealists who ignore practical realities, but as a people who will stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it costs us something, even when the conventional wisdom says we should look the other way. When she finished speaking, the crowd was silent. Then, slowly, the Voranthi present began changing their skin color in unison, shifting to the brightest shade of blue that their biology could produce. It was a color Sarah had never seen before, one that existed at the very edge of their emotional spectrum. Later, Nalith explained what it meant. It is the color of transcendent gratitude, the color we show when someone has given us something so precious that no words can express our thanks. We have not shown it to an outsider in all our recorded history, until today. Sarah returned to Earth with a new purpose. She founded an organization dedicated to monitoring alien governments for signs of mass atrocities. She trained young diplomats in the skills they would need to recognize oppression and find ways to fight it. She wrote books and gave lectures and advised governments. Not everyone appreciated her work. Some still believed she had been wrong to interfere in Voranthi affairs. Some argued that humans had no right to impose their values on other civilizations. The debates continued, as they always would. But on Vorath, children learned about Sarah Chen in their schools. They learned about the human who had looked at their suffering and decided she could not look away. They learned that somewhere in the galaxy, there were people who believed that freedom and justice were not just words, but principles worth fighting for. And when young Voranthi asked their parents why the humans had helped them, the answer was always the same. Because it was the right thing to do. On the 10th anniversary of the revolution, Sarah received one final honor. The new Voranthi government had created their highest recognition for non-citizens, and they wanted to give it to her. But more than the medal or the ceremony, what moved her most was a letter that came with it. It was from a young Voranthi woman named Sareth, who had been born in a correction facility during the old regime. Her mother had died there, and she had been raised by the state, told that her family had been criminals. When the records were opened after the revolution, she had learned the truth. Her mother had been arrested for writing poetry that questioned the government. "I am alive because the revolution came in time," Sareth wrote. "I am free because one human decided that truth mattered more than convenience. I am writing poetry now, the way my mother did. But unlike her, I do not have to hide. I can share my words openly without fear. Ambassador Chen, you have never met me and you never will. But you saved my life and the lives of millions like me. Every day that I wake up free, every poem that I write, every moment of joy that I experience, all of it exists because you refuse to stay silent. Thank you, thank you, thank you." Sarah kept that letter on her desk for the rest of her life. On the days when she wondered whether any of it had mattered, whether one person could really change anything in a galaxy of trillions of beings, she would read it again. And she would remember why she had done what she did. Because somewhere in the universe, there was a young woman writing poetry without fear. Because a world that had known only lies for centuries was learning to tell the truth. Because sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward. And because humanity, for all its flaws and failures, was capable of being a force for good in the galaxy, not through military power or economic dominance, but through something simpler and more powerful. The willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it cost them something. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. And it was enough.